Okay, everybody, I appreciate you coming to this session. The session is Real-World Apps and Lessons Learned on the Way. So my name is David Hall-Tipping. I'm a Solutions Manager here at Logi Analytics. You may have seen some of the work that my group does. If you go to the website under the Solutions, a lot of the applications and solution demos that we have created under the gallery is the work that my group does. One of the things that the conference organizers asked us to do is when we introduce ourselves, we have to really sort of say something about ourselves that people might not know. And to be honest, a lot of that I still want to keep unknown. But one thing I do sort of show you, in a prior life, before I came to the United States, I was a research neuropharmacologist. And I researched and specialized in the neural defects underlying schizophrenia. So a lot of people who know me say that actually explains a lot about me. So the other aspect is when they asked me to be a moderator here, I was a little confused because of my science background, actually I also have a minor in nuclear chemistry. A moderator for me was a substance like graphite that's used to slow neutrons in a nuclear reaction. And I thought, well, perhaps we're really not here to talk about that. So I found this little thing called the interweb and looked up the definition. And moderator is someone who mediates disputes and attempts to avoid violence. And I thought, well, that's a little extreme. But having watched the American presidential election and debate on Sunday, I realized this is actually probably pretty accurate. And so my role up here is really to stop these two from becoming two fisticuffs. So having sort of rather lambasted them, I'd like to introduce the panel who graciously come up to explain some of the developments of their apps. And James, I'd love you to sort of introduce yourself and start off and perhaps tell us a little bit about you, your role, and a little bit about your company.
Sure, thanks. And thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I work for a company called Femwell Group Health. I am the Director of Data Services and Innovation. We are a healthcare MSO with almost 500 providers in the state of Florida. On the data services side of the house, we are responsible for all of the reporting services, the analytics infrastructure, all of the system interfaces. On the innovation side, we're always working on web development, mobile app development, any technology product offering that we're coming to market with falls under the innovation team. So some examples of those would be like telemedicine, our mobile app, which we're going to show you today, a digital check-in solution for patients, et cetera.
Excellent. Raju, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Raju Kakarlapudi, public health epidemiologist with the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County Health Department in Lincoln, Nebraska. We don't have that much cool portfolio as you, James. We started using Logi as a tool because of shortfall in our workforce. So we wanted to automate a lot of things, push data to the public, and for the nonprofits to use.
So we're here to talk about real-world apps and the lessons on the way. And one of the things that I'm always interested in is what was the sort of catalyst? What's the driver behind, the start of your app? I remember myself once I had an aha moment when I was working on Wall Street in a trading house, and when the market got hot, I looked and saw all the traders smacking the enter key on their computer. And the reason they were doing that was, obviously this goes back a few decades, but one of the things that they were doing was trying to poll the database for the latest price. And it looked at me that, wouldn't it be great if, at that aha moment, wouldn't it be great if you could produce something that would push the prices out so that, for instance, if there was a movement in the yield curve, all those bonds that were priced or benchmarked against the yield curve would actually recalculate, and the positions and the book value would calculate automatically and have it in real time. And so that, for me, was a really aha moment. And I was wondering from the panel that what was it that got you started on creating your app? And James, why don't you sort of start off by telling us about your mobile app?
Sure, I think to answer your question, I think it started for us with a problem, and the problem was that the physicians could not get value out of the canned reporting capabilities out of their practice management system. It was very limited in functionality, sometimes didn't really paint the whole picture. Other times were just flat out inaccurate. So we had to come up with a way to provide data to the providers in an easy way through a secure platform, obviously HIPAA compliant, so that we could actually provide a service to the practices that would allow them to use data in a beneficial way. So what we did, basically, the steps that we took to get there was we had to extract all of the data from the practice management system, which is a little bit dated system. If you are familiar with healthcare, you'll know that we're about 10 years behind the curve of everyone else. We had to extract all the data from the legacy system. We had to get it into a data warehouse. We had to build report tables specific to the application that we were developing for performance reasons and others. We had to then, of course, build the application. And obviously, the last step was to put these nice visualizations of the data into the app, which honestly is probably the easiest piece because Logi makes that pretty easy to do. So once we have those data reporting tables all spec'd out, loaded, and in the cloud accessible, then Logi makes it pretty easy for us to actually display the data that makes sense for the practices.
Excellent. Now, Raju, when I looked at this diagram that you sent me, I must admit I was a little intimidated because I suspect that you don't have one app. I think you have such a wide area to cover. So what was the driver behind what you were trying to achieve in producing analytical apps?
Well, primary driver is budget cuts because of collapse in 2007, 2008, when the stock market collapsed. Our tax revenue of the city decreased. So we had a lot of workforce, all the vacant positions were cut or put on hold forever that were never filled. So that was our primary thing is like, how do we still complete doing the work, but with reduced workforce? And in public health, at least at a local level, there is not that big volume as you see in a federal government level, but the complexity is the same. And at the same time, we have a hotline to all our local people, call our members directly to us and complain why we are not doing this. But that was one of the drivers, is to push the data in a timely manner to both our internal applications as well as external partners and to the public in a responsible way and a very quick way. That was our main intention.
So you have quite a lot of different areas here. Are you responsible for all of them, or how does that work?
None of us are anywhere close to knowing anything about technology. When we started this one, I only knew computers come black and white, some have a fruit logo on it. So, we have a developer team. We are content experts, but not tech experts. That's one of the reasons why we purchased Logi, is because first, it was, at that time, about 6-7 years ago when we purchased, it was still cheap, and it came with a blank slate, and we can do whatever we want with it. So that was the driver.
So in terms of the different areas that you have to, how do you balance them? I mean, because you've probably got demands from different areas of the city and the county. So it looks like you have to produce lots of different apps for lots of different people.
Yes. How we tackle this thing is we developed a platform of developing internal applications and external public applications, two separate approach. And for public applications, as you know, government data, especially public data, especially in the healthcare, in the public health setting, is very dicey because some of it is public, some of it is very HIPAA restricted. So we had to balance that, wheel a lot more in different ways. So we started approaching public data in a different way and internal applications in a different way for program evaluation and development. So we are still in the process of creating applications for all of our programs. Some of the programs really do not have, if you are 10 years behind, I think we are about 50 years behind in data systems. Some of them are really unstructured data. One of the applications that we are going to show tomorrow in our demo, each of our nurses maintain their own separate cheat sheets, post notes before we started the application. information about their clients and things like that. So.
So that's actually a good segue. Perhaps we could look at some of your apps. And so, James, could you sort of go into a little bit of detail of what you were trying to achieve in developing this app?
Sure. So this is our provider-facing application. What's shown up here is specifically the financial reporting module, but it serves a couple of other functions besides that. Really, its main purpose is to serve as a communication mechanism to the entire group. It serves as a provider directory, so anyone can look up any information about any doctor in our network. They can actually make group purchases through the app, so there's a group purchasing module that actually enables discounts for bulk ordering of office supplies and things of that nature. There is a referral piece, so if you are at the doctor, your primary care doctor, and your primary care wants you to see a specialist, they basically just go to the provider, the specialist, they look up the specialist, click a button that says refer patient, and then they can actually search for the patient that's checked in. There's a link between the app and the practice management system, so they know which patients are checked in. They select the app that, they select the patient that shows up in the dropdown, and all the demographic information is displayed. They click send, and a note gets sent to the patient of the referred doctor's information, and the referred doctor actually gets a note as well. So that's the core functionality. What you see up here is the financial reporting piece, and this is what I kind of talked about earlier. And these are the main reports. We have net receipts broken down by responsibility, insurance, or guarantor. We have charges. We have percent of charges. Net collection percentage is a big one. And then we have collections reports in the lower right-hand side here. This will tell you how fast your payers are paying you, how fast you're actually posting charges, how fast you're posting payments, how fast is your charge posting lag, et cetera. So pretty powerful metrics all in one place, whereas before they might have had a couple here in one system and a couple somewhere else that they'd have to go, or we would have to manually distribute them on a monthly basis, which is not efficient at all. Now this is something that gets updated. Right now it's weekly, it will be daily eventually, so that they'll have fresh data, and the goal is to really get them to log in every single day and make it part of their routine.
Excellent, thank you. So, Raju, I have one that I saw, the Food Establishment Inspection Viewer, and so this is one of the many. This is an outward-facing one, is it?
Yes.
And so describe what this is trying to do here.
Okay, we inspect restaurants, all food-related businesses like convenience stores, super centers, everything. And this application here, the user can search for the rate. We built an in-house rating system. I know like a lot of big cities have like ABC ratings, scoring, red, green, yellow, all kinds of rating systems they post on the restaurant, doors. So we wanted to move away from that kind of an approach because there is a lot of human bias. Like if that day the inspector mood was not right, he would give certain score, and that will ding the restaurant. So we wanted to move away from that one and drive statistics, drive our rating tool. And this is our, we used our rating system based on Z-scores within classes. Like a fast food restaurant can compare with fast food. Walmart's will compare to like Walmart's or Target's rather than with convenience stores and so forth. So this is our application that we put online for the public use.
So how did you sort of differentiate between the classifications of the various restaurants? I mean, I was looking at it when I played around with this, and I looked at McDonald's and I thought, well, if I go to Ruth Chris's restaurant, it's probably not going to be the same. And you just mentioned that you have a sort of segmentation. Yeah. How did you come up with that?
Yeah, like within the licensing structure of these facilities, they are broken down. Like fast food has a different licensing structure compared to a full-service restaurant.
Right.
Those are written in the city charter. So we use the city charter and the local Nebraska food law to break down those facility types.
And how do you aggregate the data, or how do you get the data for this? I mean, obviously there's a food inspection process.
Yes.
How does the data get into this app?
Yeah, like every day in the morning, all our food inspectors, they go to their respective zones to do the inspections for that day's quota of their things. Each inspector approximately inspects about, they have like around 200 restaurants or businesses within their geographic area. So at 4 o'clock in the evening, they come back and they dock their tablets to our network, and all the data is downloaded. And at night, we process the data with Logi scheduling and then update the public application as well as our internal database as well.
Often, a major design principle when you're building applications is to focus on the need of the user. So James, I mean, who are your users? I mean, you've mentioned a little bit about them. There's quite a fine range of roles and job responsibilities. How did you go about targeting them, and how do you identify them?
Sure. So for this specific application, our target users would be providers, mid-levels, and office managers. Those are the users that have access to this mobile application. Luckily for us, we have, in our physician group, we have committees, and these committees aid us in helping to make business decisions. So, for example, I have two committees that I'm a part of, the Performance Improvement Committee and the Innovation Committee, both of which are comprised of about 10 to 15 physicians, who are our users in this case, who can really help give us feedback and be a part of the prototyping process and really come up with requirements to help us before we actually start any development.
And so, how about you, Raju? This is, I mean, because I should think, whereas James is quite far-ranging, I mean, you've got everybody on the sun in Nebraska looking at this.
Yes, one of the reasons why we had to put this food application online was because the local media was always filing for freedom of information requests. For this data, every month we are getting a lot of freedom of information requests. So we wanted, because by freedom of information law, you have to give the data to the requesting entity free of cost if it takes less than 4 hours. But they would specify, they became more specific in nature in the first place. So they want this particular McDonald's and that particular Burger King's inspection records for last 10 years. So we had to start mining more data like that way. So that was one of our driving force to building an application like this. And the other thing is also we wanted to build a rating system between our food establishments so that it would reduce there is something called critical and non-critical violations in the restaurants. Critical is that is more prone to spreading of diseases and outbreaks, and non-critical is like, you have a broken spatula and those kinds of things. So we want to reduce those violations overall in the food industry. That is one of the things. So.
And so on the other side, I have another one here that I got, was an internal app I think you had. So you've got users within the city organization and the county of Lancaster. So who are the internal users on this?
This is currently only the health departments use. This is a time management system that we built in-house. We wanted to move, government loves paper, if you don't really know about that. So we wanted to move away from, to become a more paperless office. And this was our primary factor is, for every person that requests a leave, they used to have those 3 carbon copy things in our office. It has to go to you, 1 copy to the employee who's requesting the leave, 1 copy to the supervisor, 1 copy to the personnel, 1 copy to the director, and all these things will be stored in your files forever until the employee leaves the place. So we wanted to move away from that one, and that's why we built this application. This is our internal time management application that clients are all our internal health department employees. We are venturing, other city departments are slowly starting to adopt these things, but some departments don't want to do it because they have, for example, in the health department, we have close to 170 employees. It makes sense for us to use this kind of an approach, but our law department only has 16 people. For them, it was not, someone to manage their thing, the personnel and all that stuff. It was not making sense for them, so they didn't like it. So there was, it's a mixed reaction per se. For us, we built a lot of things into this one. When you're talking about a government agency, there are a lot of union rules. You had to incorporate into the thing, overtime rules. Some unions give overtime, some don't give overtime. All these things. So yeah, it's complex.
It's quite a big environment. So one of the things, there was actually a session earlier this morning called Understanding Your Users' Needs. One size does not fit all. And the takeaway from that was that the bottom line is that investing time at the beginning of a project pays dividends, not only during the design process and the development, but also when you release it and use it. So I remember actually when I was on the same trading floor, the particular trading house that I had was with built this $300 million computer system. Most of it was the back end, and $300 million was quite a lot in the early 90s. And so when they came down and put the trading entry on the desk of the traders and said, there you go, they basically said, no, I'm not going to use it. And so when they asked why not, he said, well, you never ever came down and asked me what I do. This is not what I do, and this is not how I do my business. So it was a big learning lesson for me, and I'm wondering, did you go through the same process where you Raju, did you sort of interview the users to find out how they did their work, how you were going to go about it? What was the design philosophy that you had?
Yes, we did. It went through a lot of QI process. Both applications went through a lot of internal QI processes when we did that. Like when we launched our first food application in around early 2012, and as soon as on the day we launched the application, I got a call from our local journalist asking me why didn't you put autocomplete? And I had no idea what this thing autocomplete is. Google just introduced autocomplete about 6 months before that. And she cited, Google is already doing it, why are you not? And I told her, well, you know the budget of Google versus local health department. So these are kind of things that you get.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did go through, the food application that you just saw in the earlier slide is almost, this is the 4th version that we did. And there's lots of parties involved in the application itself. We have restaurant industry lobby, or we have our food advisory council. They don't want to put any data online. Initially, our coloring system was red, yellow, green. We thought, okay, everyone knows traffic lights. And restaurant industry said, don't put red on my restaurant. And so, okay, then we made it yellow, green, and blue. So those kinds of things. And even in our initial demo to the restaurant industry and the food advisory council, we showed the application and everything. And one of the, a restaurant owner was a chef, and he said, I can't see any colors on that one. So I thought, okay, maybe my laptop and the projector was not right, and I restarted 3 or 4 times. And then he told me, well, he's colorblind, and he can't see colors. Then I didn't know there was web-safe colors for websites until that time. So I had to use that approach too.
So it's sort of finding out by far a little bit. So do you keep on iterating and finding out, getting feedback to improve it?
Yes.
Yeah. What about you, James? I mean, I have to admit that even though there's a lot of theory and you do user testings, I cheat a lot and go straight into design. And so I'm guilty as everybody else. But how did you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, we collected that feedback, like I mentioned before, initially. And we went through that prototyping process. But at the end of the day, we still ran into the challenges that you mentioned. I mean, our biggest challenge would be user adoption. Doctors do not want to log into one more system after they've been inside their EHR all day, they've been inside their practice management, they've been on the patient portal, they've been on 10 other systems throughout the day. Now we're introducing another one. Well, it has to be excellent. It has to provide great value to them to even think about opening it up. So even once they did get into it and started looking at it now, we kind of underestimated how they were going to take it. Like, we had to actually explain the metrics involved because they're a little bit different than what they were reporting on before. They were more valuable and more insightful. but we actually had to describe the logic that takes place underneath the hood to really get them to understand what they were looking at and why it was important to them from a financial perspective. Once we did that and they understood that there was real value, then it's smooth sailing from there. But it's a significant effort once you get something implemented into production, at least in my environment, actually gaining the trust of the end users and having them use it on a daily basis.
And how did you go about that user adoption? Was it, I mean, it sounded that sort of hurdle of convincing them was quite high. Was there sort of an education and then was there a sort of threshold where people start saying, well, this is great, and people more and more snowballed? How did it go about?
Yeah, initially we did email campaigns. We sent out documentation. We sent out tutorial videos, none of which really hit home until you actually sit with the doctor. They won't take the time. They just don't have the time to look at that stuff. So what we would do is we would go to any and every event that we had, which we have quite a few throughout the week, after hours, committees, board meetings, anything where there would be a significant amount of doctors, we would actually go and walk them through it one by one and show them the value. Then they would in turn show their colleagues what the value was there, which helped, but it was still a significant effort on our side.
So I actually noticed, how was your app delivered? I mean, I see the form factor was a mobile up there before. Is it purely mobile, or do you have other form factors? And if so, how did you approach it? Did you sort of code as a responsive design so that it sort of just fit naturally into other devices, or did you code specifically for an iPhone and have a desktop, or how did you go about that?
Today it's strictly a mobile application, so it's iOS and Android.
Right.
So two different flavors, but essentially the same functionality.
Right. And what about you? Do you have, Raju, do you have a lot of different form factors you have to sort of cater for? People on desktops, people who might be on a mobile. So for instance, if I looked at that restaurant outside, I mean, could I see it on my laptop?
Yes.
Could I see it on my mobile?
Yeah, that one was the first one that we launched publicly on Bootstrap. It still doesn't work right because our city, we had to embed these applications in our city templates, and city templates are not really, okay, I won't say much about that.
So that's still 50 years ago. So,
Yeah, city, I mean, they started, we have our own health departments team and then the city IT team. They are completely separate. And so the city still is changing all the city websites and templates into Bootstrap. So they not necessarily meet the challenges of the newest versions of Bootstrap, I guess. Yep. So when we built our application and we tested in all kinds of devices, just without the city template, it works fine. But when you embed them in the city template, usually there'd be like another for 3 millimeters or 5 millimeters spacing problems here and there. So,
tell me about actually how you built it, James. Did you? I mean, you obviously have a dedicated dev team. Did they sort of go through a requirements process? Did they follow the traditional thing? Was it Scrum? How do you sort of go about managing this process?
So we're, I would say, a hybrid model between Agile and Waterfall, leaning more on the Agile side, but we do have lightweight documentation up front, at least to define core functionality of where we want to be at the end of the day, just so that we have that measurement defined before we start anything, which I find works best, especially in software development with end users that don't necessarily know what they want until they see it in their hands.
Yeah.
So it is still it's a very iterative approach. We still go through multiple cycles before it actually gets deployed. But from a sense that we do define requirements up front, it's very lightweight, but we do initially define those first core set of functionality.
Cool. So what about you, Raju?
Yeah, it depends on application to application. Like for internal time management application, yeah, we went through a lot of different processes before we started building the application. Our tech staff, basically tech staff of one, along with an intern, they had to understand all the intricacies of the personnel department, all the union rules before they start designing the database for it. So we went through extensive process even before we started that application. On the food side, because we built the entire rating system in-house, it went through, even before we built the Logi application, it went to a lot of revisions, like, okay, what is the number that we want to project to the people? Like, how are you going to measure it? How are you going to compare it with similar establishments and so forth? So there was lots of statistics involved. It's about almost 6 months process for me and the food team and the food supervisors and so forth, even before we started the application. Once we built the application, obviously we had to cater the needs of the restaurant industry, public needs, the media pressure, as well as the government. We want to push the data as much as possible, but we are restricted on how much we can push it. The public only wants to see all the bad actors. They don't care about the rest of the thousands of, they only want to pick those bad one or two. The restaurant industry doesn't want to show anything because they're afraid, it is something bad about the restaurant and they'll lose business and so forth.
So you sort of touched on a subject that is what I wanted to get you to talk about was the challenges you face, and you obviously elucidated something there, but I think both of you must have like HIPAA requirements, and all the regulations around there must be quite daunting when you're implementing an app based on regulations or incorporating regulations. What about Jane?
Very strict, yes. We had to keep security as a top priority in anything we do, especially with PHI. Sometimes we decide to just mask the PHI altogether and just aggregate data at high levels. That way we don't have to necessarily be that stringent on what we can publish and what we can't. But yeah, that's always, before we start any development, we have a security checkpoint that takes place by an outside consultant that gives it the stamp of approval before we move forward.
And how about you?
Yeah, for us it's very extensive. We do, even within our internal applications, we make sure that wrong people don't see each other's data as well. So yeah, we have very robust HIPAA requirements. The program itself has to be, we have to be HIPAA certified to access certain data. Like for my division, I'm semi-HIPAA certified, so I don't have access to the full data, even though we build applications, but I can't see the real data or anything like that. Only the people who are associated with the programs, when we link the databases to them, they can look at the data, not necessarily anyone else. Even the developers can't look at the data.
Sounds a bit like me sometimes, semi-certified. So one of the things I would like to offer out is what sort of advice would you offer the audience here for having gone through this? And perhaps you can even admit some of your screw-ups you had, on the way. I'm sure you didn't have any, but it'd be interesting to know, some of the lessons learned, some of the screw-ups, and maybe some advice.
Yeah, I would say focus on, well, for us, we should have focused on our implementation plan just as much as we focused on the actual development and deployment and everything leading up to that. We fell a little bit in that sense, in that it took us a very long time from the time we deployed it to when people actually started using it and used it frequently. I mean, you can develop the best app in the world, but if nobody knows about it, even if they do know about it and don't know how to use it, it's not any good. So you have to really educate people, and I would say focus on the implementation plan just as much as you do every other piece of the project.
That's pretty good advice. What about you?
Yeah, for us, I mean, design, we did a lot of screw-ups through the process, primarily because none of us are of, technical background per se. My first application we built, we used a Logi dashboard approach, put everything in panels and launched the application. And we hardly had anyone, even from our internal staff, accessing the application. Then we asked a few people, like, why are you not even asking? I mean, you wanted the data. They would just send me an email. I want this data, and I will, okay, look up the dashboard. Well, I don't want to. So those kinds of things. And then we found out, actually, the people really don't want to customize their views. I mean, there's a different approach to, on the tech side, like if you see all the demos here about self-service and all these things, they are so customized to individuals' views. But the public really doesn't want to do that. They want instant consumption of data, which is, even for one of our applications that we built for the mayor's office, once we just built a standard application, one chart below the other, they were like so happy. I don't have to go add panel, then drag it all over the place. I just want data to consume. I just want to go print it, if I'm taking it to some public event or something like that.
We're actually close to the end. Before we close, I wanted to sort of see whether any of the audience might want to sort of ping them with a question about what they went through. So I've got a slide for you up there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, we, as far as inspectors are concerned, we started doing electronic inspections of all our food inspections since, I think, 2002 or something like that. We built an application called Inspect Tab in-house using Access data. Okay, the data resides on each individual inspector's laptop. But when they sync in, Brent actually wrote the tool, I think Brent and Mark Kenny, they wrote a tool that will dump all the data from all the individual inspectors' Access databases into our sequence. Yeah, when you talk, we have all kinds of databases. Also, we have legacy systems, we have mainframes that were never shut down since '91. And so, yeah, so because people who developed those databases, over the years they retired and so forth, and we couldn't even find employees to replace them. So with that similar skill set, so no one wants to touch those legacy systems. So.
Yeah, we experience the same challenges. I think that's pretty common across the healthcare industry.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at the end, so I really wanted to take this opportunity to thank you both for coming and show us your apps. I think it's tremendous what you've done, and I thank you for sharing today. Thank you.